Hi, welcome to Bookmark. I'm your host, Don Noble. Today's guest is the writer John T. Edge, arguably, no, certainly the world's greatest expert on Southern food. Edge has been a columnist for the New York Times, the Oxford American, Garden and Gun, and is the author of a shelf of books on Southern food. His latest is The Potlicker Papers, the story of the modern South told through foods and cooks. I spoke with John T. Edge in Studio UA in the Digital Media Center on the campus of the University of Alabama. I'm really glad to see you here. I have been reading your books for years.
That's generous, thank you. I'm really glad to be here with you.
And we have this big collection of friends in common. I mean, friends in Chapel Hill, friends in Oxford, Mississippi, friends everywhere. But you've not been on this show before, although I think everybody you know has been.
I feel left out until this moment. Now I'm included and I'm happy.
You're at Oxford now, but you are originally a Georgia boy?
I am. I claim Oxford in a strong way. Oxford, I reinvented myself in Oxford. I became a writer in Oxford. But increasingly as I write, I'm looking back to Georgia, the place that made me, and trying to make sense of that upbringing too. It's the projects on which I'm working now are centered in Georgia and even back in South Carolina where my parents are from.
I've only lived in a couple of southern states. You've lived in at least several. Georgia is not wildly different from Mississippi, is it?
Wow, I mean, there's so many Souths, you know this. You're setting me up here, you know this answer. There's so many Souths, and the rural Georgia I grew up in was so different from the Atlanta I claimed in my 20s. To be a small town Georgia boy, I grew up in a town of less than 100 people. And for me in the 1980s, to get to Atlanta was to get to a place that was wild and different, that was open when my town was closed. And I moved from Atlanta to Mississippi, and to move from Atlanta, I lived in in-town neighborhood. I lived in Little Five Points, full of, funky worlds, a very diverse world, 2 Ethiopian restaurants within walking distance. To move from there to Oxford was to move to a different South.
And you've written of your favorite food as a child, your favorite meal. No one is going to fail to guess what it was.
Indeed. I gather you're leading me toward barbecue.
Yes, in this case.
I grew up about 1.5 miles, 2 miles from a barbecue joint, Old Clinton BBQ. And, I rode my bicycle up there as a boy. There was freedom in riding my bicycle up there. And that place still figures in the stories I tell about myself. I can picture the smoke swirling out of the chimney. I can picture Miss Coulter, this woman, a kindly woman with a cumulus of gray curls on top of her head and a huge cleaver in her hand, chopping pork. It was a defining place for me.
And the accompaniment to the barbecue was Brunswick Stew.
And
I had my first Brunswick Stew when I was about 25 years old. I was not a Southerner to start with.
And you had this in North Carolina together? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I didn't know what it was. Somebody said, you never had Brunswick Stew. You come with me.
That was a good friend to introduce you to Brunswick Stew.
Yeah, I thought it was mostly corn. Is that?
Corn, beans, pork, chicken maybe, depending upon the place who makes it. Georgia and North Carolina argue about the origin point of Brunswick Stew, and Virginia has a few things to say as well. I love it. And it's not I can't argue that Brunswick Stew is the best thing you will ever ingest, but I can tell you that when I eat it, it brings back memories. It brings back something really important to me.
Food, like smells, because food is smells.
Yeah. It's transportative, yeah.
It does. It takes you you put a certain thing, smell a certain food, taste a certain food, and you can be 20 years old or 10 years old or 5 years old. Yeah. Way back in the 60s, when I was still a student, I became interested in Southern literature and studied it very, very hard for a long time, and was at that point a part of a group of people, Lewis Rubin and Lewis Leary and Hugh Holman and a whole collection of writers, scholars, who were creating a thing called Southern literature. There had been writers.
Right.
You have done a kind of parallel thing. You have created a field of study or an entity, I don't know the right word exactly, called Southern food or Southern cuisine. All right, take this in the order that pleases you. Do other regions, can you say there's Midwestern food? And if so, why or why not? And what makes it possible to say that there's this thing called Southern food? Is it always the Civil War?
The answer to the last one is no. I can come back to the others, but the last for me is a definitive no. But for me, Southern food is as diverse as the South is today, because for me, I think about Southern food as a contemporary product of people and place. So you were very kind in framing my work as comparable to the movement that kind of enshrined Southern literature as a term and field of study, and I thank you for that. I don't think I can own up to that, but I do think they have something in common. This search for meaning in place is food and literature offer you paths to understanding your place and your people. And I also think that there is a rage to explain, as, who's that?
Fred Hobson, yeah.
Right, and both those expressions are linked to our rage to explain. This is who I am, this is from whence I come, these are the trials and tribulations of my people, and food is an expression of that, and I think literature is an expression of that.
If there were, this is preposterous, but I'll say it anyway.
Good.
If there were
like
a John T. Edge in Massachusetts or Vermont, and he determined that there was going to be such a thing as New England cuisine, could he do it?
Sure. And I mean, I think in many ways the South, this rage to explain that has encumbered us and compelled us, has inspired other regions. So I've talked to people who are developing a New England Foodways Association. I've talked to people
right?
In the Midwest.
Right.
There's a California Foodways is a group in California. We're all trying to figure out who we are, right? I mean, in a rapidly changing America, food is one of our most conservative, not politically conservative, but socially conservative, one of our most conservative outputs. And we're looking to those kind of tethers to the past to try to understand who we are today. And I think that's happening all across the country. You know about it more, because you live here, we both live here, but I think too because we got more to talk about in the South. We've got more to explain. That rage is deeper, and the well from which we draw and on which we draw is deeper.
John Edgerton, someone I know we both admire very, very much. My encounters with him were enormously pleasant.
He close talked to you? He always close talked. Like if he liked you, he would step into your world.
But he and other people talk about the Americanization of the South and the Southernization of the United States.
Right.
And is that true for food?
Sure. I think that there's a give and take. I see a rapidly diversifying South. I see Vietnamese American cooks on the Gulf Coast reinterpreting what we think of as Cajun food. I see a rapidly changing South. I do see ways in which some Southern aspects are being exported and adopted by the whole of the nation. I mean, you could make the old point that someone like Jim Alkmudy writing for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution would have made 20 years ago about stock car racing, and he's smart about that. Religion, especially the religion of Jim and Tammy Faye Baker, super church, televangelist religion exported across the country. There are many exports that originate here and adopted by the rest of the nation, and we in turn have adopted.
We have a lot to answer for, apparently.
Me too.
But at the heart of this, I mean, you're writing, not too many pages go by where it doesn't, in some fashion, circle back to race and racism, whether it's barbecue, whether it's who is holding the hoe, chopping the cotton, or the or
the collards or whatever
the
they may be,
or
yeah.
whatever it is, or who's in the kitchen of the big house, or who's the pit master. By the way, the funniest line in these two books is the line about, you can go ahead and have a Gentile internist if
you're not playing with the
but
odds.
you're not playing the odds.
And that's not my line. That's Calvin Trillin's line.
Oh, was it?
You know? Yeah, if you're going to steal from someone, you steal from the best.
I thought that was amazing because
Yeah.
in terms, that was in reference to barbecue. That is, if you're going to have a pit master, you want that pit master to be an African American.
So he was playing on two different stereotypes and upending both stereotypes.
Yes.
Trillin is good at that. Great at that.
The whole, but the core, the thing that comes along is the plantation cook, the cook in the big house, the cook in the restaurant, always black. Did no one white cook anything until 1950 or something? Or almost.
You know, people in Appalachia, especially working poor in Appalachia, would stand athwart that. And I knew you were saying it playfully, but you know, as a white man born of the South, I feel like a lot of my responsibility is to pay down, and the term I borrowed in essence from Edgerton and I think is useful, is to pay down a debt of pleasure owed to the cooks and servers and farmers who came before me. And if you live in the South, that debt is largely owed to people of color, and it's largely owed to women. You know, and though for me this book really does revolve around racism and its impact and on race and its legacies, you know, by chapter 9 we're dealing with gender and the ways in which women step back into the kitchen and take control of narratives about food, and all that is mixed up in it.
As I was reading along in the Potlicker Papers, you know, especially. I love the places where the road seems to divide or a contradiction occurs, and there are several of these. They're kind of neat. One of them is soul food. Right. Soul food used to be, like the Chinese say, we don't call it Chinese food, we just call it food. Right. It used to be just food. Right. And then there was a rage for soul food, and then a rejection of soul food. How does that work?
Yeah, I mean, well, if you think about, you know, it is like a conversation between authors about how to tell the story of the South. And there's a movement in this particular juncture, you know, the late 60s, early 70s, the term soul food comes into parlance in large part because it's linked to Black Power movements and the like, that soul food and soul power are rising, and that is the food of the Black urban cooks, many of whom have left the rural South and gone to the urban North. By the next turn comes to soul food as something that Edna Lewis, a daughter of Freetown, Virginia, of Black people who own their land and work their land, saying the cooking of Black people is not necessarily soul food. It's not necessarily the food of urban Blacks who are making do, using convenience foods to replicate the taste they left in the South. The food Edna Lewis espouses in the 1980s as kind of the grande dame of Southern cooking is rooted very much in the farm, rooted in the Black farm. And so she rejects soul food and says, all Black food is not soul food. Don't flatten this. There's much texture to this.
It would have been simple-minded of me, but I was very tempted to start this conversation by talking about pot liquor. I love the irony of the pot liquor.
Yeah, I mean, there's I chose pot liquor for a bunch of different reasons because there are layers to it, right? And so pot liquor in itself, when you cook a mess of greens, the technical term, when you cook a mess of greens, the liquid left at the bottom of the pot is the pot liquor, and the distilled essence of those flavors is in that.
Yeah.
And also the minerals have been leached out into there. So in days of enslavement, it was typical for slave holders to take the greens for themselves, seemingly the
good
more
stuff.
valuable, the good stuff,
Yes.
and deign to give the pot liquor and perhaps to crumble cornbread into bowls, or in some cases feeding troughs, as horrible as that is to hear come from my mouth. That in fact, the joke was on the slave holders because, in fact, the nutrients were there in that pot liquor.
That is cosmic. I mean, it's positively Buddhist to think that the
Beautiful way of thinking.
that all the nutrition was in the stuff that they so generously let go. Right. Paula Deen, I don't know what to say. I'm not even supposed to say anything, so I probably won't much.
Go ahead.
No, but there she is. She's selling Southern cooking, the Southern food, and she enormously popular, and she presumably uses racial terms in her kitchen. That word gets out, and she's ruined overnight. I mean, I don't know, is she back? Does she have
I'm sure she is back. I mean, she had enough of a following to leverage that and make a return.
But aside from the whole horrible, complicated issue of political correctness, I mean, did she really say it? If she really said it, did she really deserve to have her life turned upside down, and so on and so on? That's really not.
It was a deposition. She said it.
She said it.
Yeah.
But then the discussion of her situation in your book gets much more subtle.
It is,
and you get into there like appropriation, like she's selling black recipes from African American cooks.
Yeah.
I mean, how does that work?
Well, I mean, to me, Paula Deen is a flawed person for a bunch of different reasons. It would be, who's your favorite author, your favorite Southern author?
Maybe Faulkner, sure, why not?
Okay,
sure.
So it would be as if Paula Deen representing Southern food and passing off the things she cooks as Southern food would be like Louis Grizzard claiming to be Faulkner's equal.
Oh.
I mean, it's you know, and maybe I shouldn't pick on Grizzard. We can give you somebody else who I don't know. She is perverting and representing at the same time. She, by way of that television show, came to introduce many people to Southern food, and her Southern food was, you know, 2 donuts with a sausage patty in the middle. You know, her Southern food was put more gravy on it. Her Southern food was these things. That was, for me as a white man, that was kind of problematic. The greater sin was that, you know, as her story spins out, that much of, or some of what she passed off as her inventions, much of the muscle in her kitchen and the memory and knowledge in her kitchen was born of black women who didn't get the credit they deserved, which is, you know, a repetition of an old offense in the South. And that came to be her big problem.
She wasn't exactly appropriating, she was claiming ownership of stuff that she had no right to claim.
Television's tough, right? So, you know, I mean, it is. I mean, she was running a television show, and as someone who now runs a television show, like, I have some degree of sympathy for her, but, you know, she built a business, and she built a business in which white people have long profited based on the labor of black women and black men. And as best as I can tell, she has some more debts to pay down, and that's what I'm working toward as well, paying down debts.
The black women, I mean, aside from the restaurant cooks and professionals, one of the things that you write about and this is something that happened here in Tuscaloosa, And it really attracted my attention a few years ago. Now you focused, when you wrote about the Montgomery bus boycott, you wrote about the woman Gilmore.
Georgia Gilmore.
Gilmore, yes. Who fed the boycotters and sold pies and cakes, and then actually her kitchen and her home became like a salon for Martin Luther King Jr. and others. She was a home kitchen, except in her case it was
home restaurant, a home kitchen, however you want.
Home
in
restaurant,
Cuba,
right.
They call them paladares.
Yes.
It's a comparable phenomenon.
Right. A few years ago, I know, I'm no expert on this, but I know that they're scattered all over Tuscaloosa.
Yeah. Still today?
But a few years ago, there was a big crackdown because there were no licenses. There was I thought that was a shame.
Right.
Well, let me ask you: are these home restaurants? Are they still all over the place? Are they more secret? Is it a kind of a guerrilla warfare that's going on here?
I don't know to say they're still all over the place,
Yeah.
but it depends on the state. Some states have cottage food preparation statutes that are more forgiving of that, and and it's usually not by state but by a municipality.
Yeah.
So some are more forgiving of those, like the idea of you go to a convenience store or a country store and you see like pies up there that are wrapped up in cellophane.
Yes.
Like those are bacon carry women is the term I use. So that's fairly common. I mean, the caramel cakes you'd see in South Alabama, the multi-layer caramel cakes, people might be doing those in their home and then bringing them for sale. So some of that stuff still exists. And my instinct is, and I know this to be the case, that especially in Mexican-American communities and others where the newer immigrants stepping into a world oftentimes start their businesses in their homes. So,
well, one of the places that I shop, it's very clear that there are women shopping there who are buying hundreds of dollars worth of stuff once a week or more oftener. And it's clear to everybody, I think, silently, that they have a clientele. They have a certain number of, I think, blue-collar folk who, by arrangement, in a sense, reservation, show up at their back door and come in and eat.
I mean, you call and you ask what's the special that day, or you get now more often you get a text thread that says this is showing up. There's a Honduran restaurant in Oxford, Mississippi, where I live, that began that way, that began selling plate lunches out of the house, and now they have a restaurant, but they still don't take credit cards or like. I use Venmo to pay them, which is equivalent of cash for me, and it goes straight to the woman who owns it, and you can see the kind of shadow of the former way in which they did business in a home in this brick and mortar today.
Well, we see it every Saturday at the farmers market, where
right.
people sell pies and cakes.
Exactly.
But somehow or other, they're exempt from the Board of Health kind of problem.
Right, and these are probably those cottage laws. I don't know what the laws are here. But there's something really intimate, right, in the idea that you're going to someone's home. Georgia Gilmore's home was not only a place of power, but it was this place of intimacy. I write in the book about how she called Martin Luther King Jr., probably the most celebrated Southerner of the 20th century. She called him a heifer, like she picked on him. And that's one of the things that, part of the exchange is he got treated like everybody else, which is part of the gift of Georgia Gilmore to him.
Right. In a society which makes so much noise about entrepreneurship, it seems that that's one of the things we could really get very generous about, is people figuring out how to make a buck cooking and selling food in their
It's
own
hard
homes.
because so many of the laws, the health laws, really are built for people who do large volume, and they should deal with some of those dictates. But the home cook, I'm hoping that cottage laws will allow them to flourish as you're describing.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think we're probably headed in the other direction: more regulation, more licenses, more signs on the wall that say 85 or so. That it's something that as we all go on and the decades roll, it's interesting. I find it interesting that if we 10, God only knows, 20, 30 years ago, if someone had said Montgomery boycott, bus boycott, or something like that, I would have said, yeah, I know all about that.
Right.
We all thought, and it's interesting when by your going forward and doing the history of the modern South from a different angle, all of a sudden that opens up in a different way.
I appreciate you saying that. I mean, one of the things that I try to do with my writing, I realize that, I have a number of different audiences, and in addition to books, I write a column for Garden and Gun, and I make a television show, and I feel like there's the possibility that by telling them about the Montgomery bus boycotts by way of food, I might find an audience that might have been a little less interested in that, and maybe even somewhat threatened by that. I might be able to pull them in, because I want the South to embrace its history in all its ugliness and all its beauty. And that's my own struggle. That's my own want. And I want co-conspirators.
It is your challenge and your calling. Well, you may not believe this, but this conversation is drawing to a close.
We're done?
We're done. So what I want to know is, let's sit down and do a second episode, a second.
I'd welcome the opportunity to come back.
Good. So I won't ask you questions like, what new book are you working on, until the end of the next episode.
Okay, deal. I'd love to talk about that. I'm almost ready to talk about that.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.